This is our second lecture in session 13, and we're continuing our discussion of various theories of crime and how they're portrayed in film. In the last lecture, we talked about biological theories and their portrayal in film, and then environmental theories such as Shaw McKay's version of neighborhood disorganization and how it's portrayed in film. In this session, we're going to talk about broadly psychological explanations of crime and how they appear in films. Psychological explanations of crime appear a lot more frequently today than they have in the past. American Psycho is a good example of that. Even Dexter on TV is an example of... although Dexter, now that I'm thinking about it, it might even qualify as a biological theory. He might have some kind of biological need to kill. But psychological explanations of crime are quite popular, and I'm sure you can think of the psychotic killer in a lot of films, the crazy stalker, those types of characters in a lot of recent films. In these films, criminals suffer from various psychological impairments. Either they have some type of throwback to a parent, some kind of, we might say, a Freudian problem where there's we could see those issues derived from psychoanalytic theories. Maybe there's an Oedipus complex. An Oedipus complex means that one lusts after their mother, and they have murderous impulses directed at the father. We see this theme a lot more in film than you might think we do. And of course, one of the classics of this type of Oedipus complex, or again, this idea comes from Freud, is Psycho. This was an Alfred Hitchcock film. Most of you are probably familiar with Psycho. Norman Bates is the villain, although he can be sympathetic at times in the film. He kills his mother. He kills his mother because he's jealous that she's taken a lover or another boyfriend. So not only does he kill his mother and his mother's lover, he keeps her body and continues his relationship with his mother even though she's passed away. Most of you probably know the plot. Eventually, he suffers from a split personality where part of his personality becomes his mother and part of him remains Norman. His mother is the one then that commits acts of violence. This is kind of a classic portrayal of the Oedipal complex in film, and it's repeated relatively frequently in many of the films that we see. White Heat. I may be able to provide you a clip of this after the lecture, but in White Heat, the main character, James Cagney, has a strange relationship with his mother as well. His mother is, even though James Cagney's character has a lover or a girlfriend, she may be his wife. It's been a while since I've seen the film, but his mother is still the dominant figure in his life. And in this scene, he learns that she passes away, and it's a really interesting scene, interesting acting going on in this scene. And then in more modern portrayals of film, and I'll try to also provide a clip of this, The Manchurian Candidate emphasizes this theme of Oedipal complex in film. The original Manchurian Candidate, Angela Lansbury plays the mother, and there's a rather disturbing kiss between her and her son. This occurs as well in the more modern Manchurian Candidate, and there are clear overtones of incest in this film. Before we go on to rational choice, I do want to make the point, too, that we do see psychotic killers frequently, not just those who might have psychoanalytic problems or personality disorders, but we see the psychopath in film frequently portrayed. I believe Seven, Phone Booth is one of those. We see this kind of irrational criminal that's driven by mental illness. Okay, if you remember back to your criminology class, we also have what are called rational choice theories. When rational choice theories appear in crime films, they tend to be those films where the offender is calculating the crime. They tend to be films where there's some form of financial gain that might be the motive for the crime. So movies where a spouse is murdered, where there's a robbery, a lot of drug films, corporate crimes, white-collar crime films tend to be films that explain the crime through a rational choice model. Again, not explicitly, but that's the latent theoretical message that comes across through these films. An example, we'll go back to this slide a second, an example of a rational choice in film would be the Ocean's movies, where those crimes are plotted out very methodically and very rationally. And in fact, the methodical thought that goes into the crime is a major emphasis of those types of films. Other types of films, again, I'm blanking on the title, but there was a film where Harrison Ford's wife sets him up for the murder of his mistress, and he becomes prosecuted for the murder of his mistress. Again, that would be a film that fits this rational choice model. Okay. Causes of crime in alternative, or what we might say critical or postmodern films. Again, the postmodern film calls into question why crime occurs. There's not necessarily a theoretical explanation for why that crime has occurred. And in fact, we're left again, like I've explained before in postmodern films, wondering what the motive might be for someone who commits crime. We might not even know who is the criminal, again, what kind of crime occurred or who committed the crime. We don't know if a crime has been committed, again, why that crime, what led to the crime occurring, or what the offender's motivation might be. A perfect example of this, I think, although I've had some students debate this in class, is The Dark Knight. Heath Ledger's character, the Joker, offers multiple explanations for why he commits the crime he does. Ultimately, though, he admits that it's simply because he likes to bring about chaos to expose hypocrisy. Now, maybe that's rational choice. Maybe that's because he's psychotic. Maybe there's some psychoanalytic explanations. We don't really know what his need to commit crime is, but we know that his crimes always revolve around exposing the bad in good people and the good in bad people. So if you remember that scene where they're in the boat and excuse me, the regular population is in one boat. He's put a prison population in another boat, and they're each charged with blowing up one or the other. So the people on both boats have to decide whether they're going to kill those in the other boat. I've destroyed the explanation of this, but those of you who've seen the film will know what I'm talking about. Ultimately, what happens is that the prisoners make the choice to not kill the citizens. There are citizens on the boat that are arguing to kill the prisoners. So he's exposing human hypocrisy in that film, in that scene. This is a major theme throughout this film, and I think it points to the fact that this is almost a postmodern film, in that the Joker's motives really aren't explicit, and we don't really know why he commits crime. it seems to be just chaotic and just for the enjoyment. It's almost a leisure activity. Okay, so what do crime films tell us about crime causation in general? Well, first of all, the assumption is, and again, it's not necessarily obvious, but the assumption is that crimes can be explained, that someone knows why a crime occurred, or there's at least a character who can begin to tell us why a crime occurred. Usually there's an expert who's not only able to solve the crime, but they can explain the causes of crime to us. In films, this might be the intelligent police officer, maybe a father that's investigating a crime and commits an act of vengeance. In television, we see the technologically savvy computer geeks or forensic geeks that solve all the crimes, but there's some kind of expert or scientific expertise upon which the resolution of the crime is based. So we know that, again, there's this class of people who can explain the crime to us. Like the news, crimes help us make sense of why crimes occur. They help us define what crime problems we should be paying attention to. So we think that violent crime, or in general, the public can be quite frightened of violent crime, even though it really doesn't occur to a large extent. So they help us define a crime problem. They also help us define why a crime is caused, or what causes a crime. I think I might have mentioned before that my father-in-law is convinced that his home will be broken into because someone needs money for heroin. Somewhere he's come up with the idea that drug use causes crime. So there's some form of crime causation that's related to being a heroin addict. Now we know that very few crimes are driven by addiction. In fact, offenders only report 16% of those who are incarcerated report committing a crime due to in order to obtain money to get drugs. Now, far more have drug and alcohol problems, and far more are drunk or high when they commit a crime. But statistically, few of those offenders in prison on some kind of theft or drug charge are there in order to get money to commit crime. Yet we define one of the major causes of property crime as drug use. Some films also, again, as she said before, cause us to question crime and its causes. They make us think about why crimes occur. We do this anyway, but films help spur this thought along and helps us to become more analytical about, again, why crimes might occur. Okay, this is the last lecture in our session. There will be some clips following this lecture that help illustrate the points I've tried to make. You have a discussion this week and a quiz. If you have any questions, feel free to email or post them in the virtual office.